Hello and welcome to our new class. This is really exciting. There have been sort of rumors. This has been a finalist before, and I've been looking forward to this possibility for a while. Morte by Sir Thomas Malory, one of the great classics of medieval literature, won our Mythgard Academy election this past time, so we are going to begin tonight our reading through the unabridged Morte by Sir Thomas Malory. This is going to be great. This is going to take a while, but it's going to be great fun. First, can I start off with a funny story? So I was, as usual, we're simulcasting this. The primary sort of broadcast is on through our GoToWebinar channel, as it's always been for years. And that's where, by the way, if you're watching and you see me like reading out comments that people are making and stuff, it's the people who are in the GoToWebinar session that I'm reading. Though I do have Twitch chat open as well, so if you're joining live on Twitch, I can see what you're saying there as well. Hi, Torlaniel and Druid's Fire and Crystal Aowen, who have already posted there. So that's also okay, but it's primarily going to be the GoToWebinar chat that I'm monitoring. Anyhow, so I was setting up the Twitch broadcast, right? And there's a message that you send out, right? You know, the notification message that goes out to subscribers to the channel that we're going live. So I typed something in Middle English in that, and Twitch rejected it. They rejected it on spell check principles because there were like 8 words which were not spelled correctly in modern English and had little red lines under them, and it wouldn't put it through. Like, it wouldn't let me save it. It was like it gave me a little angry little message in red print. It was like, don't type like you would type to your grandma. And I'm like, dude, this is how I would type to my grandma's distant ancestor. But anyway, that was really, really funny. So, you know, what could we do? And that, by the way, I've never had that happen to me before, but it's a fairly common problem. That is to say, when you're working with Middle English stuff, anytime you're writing in word processors or whatever, you usually just have to turn spell checker off because it's a great hindrance rather than a help, and your page will just be a massive red in front of you. And if you've got autocorrect on, oh man, the comedy, right? So anyway, good times. Okay, so I've got a whole bunch of things to tell you about today, and I'm not even talking about like regular announcements. Like, I usually start my session announcing big, awesome things that are going on in the Mythgard world, like I'll do in 20 seconds. Camps, summer camps going on. Hobbit camp has begun. Harry Potter camp starts next week. Go to signumuniversity.org/academy to find out everything about it, because it's not too late to join. And next month, August 18th, is our next regional moot, which is Bay Moot in the San Francisco area in California, located specifically in Oakland. The schedule is now posted. Go to signumuniversity.org, scroll down to the events panel, and you'll click on Bay Moot, and there it is. So we've got stuff going on. It's a lot of fun. However, tonight, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about the class. And by the way, disclosure, as you will have seen from the reading assignment, I'm not planning to get too far tonight. Tonight is all about familiarizing ourselves with this text, and that means kind of contextualizing things a little bit at first. Though I'm not going to do much historical contextualization, but I do want to talk about language and pronunciation. And we're also we're gonna do some orientation sort of within this world that Malory is writing about, and that's going to be a lot of fun. So that's why I wanted to go really slowly, especially slowly, here at the very beginning. But let me explain some things about how we're going to proceed in this class and what is going to be happening, because there is some awesome. We are breaking some new ground with this class, which I am really, really excited about. So let me tell you what I mean. First of all, one thing, this class is going to be by far the longest Mythgard Academy class that we've ever done. That's pretty much a foregone conclusion, because this is not only one of the longest books we've ever talked about, but it's in Middle English. So, we're going to take our time. I fully expect this, this discussion of Le Morte d'Arthur is going to be, in the end, I don't know what, maybe 30 sessions or something. I'm not really sure. So it's going to take a while. So long that normally, of course, I give you a full breakdown of, week by week of, here's how we're going to go through the whole book so you can know your reading assignments in advance and stuff like that. And you will remember my triumph last time with the War of the Ring class when I stuck to my schedule and even ended in one fewer weeks than I originally posted. Still just a little bit smug about that. But anyway, normally that's how I do. I'm not even going to try that with this because I'm really not 100% sure exactly how fast we're going to end up going through. In case you're wondering, whether is this going to be like exploring the Lord of the Rings, where exploring the Lord of the Rings, I was like, it's going to be at least 50 sessions or something, and now we're at session number 66, and we're less than 1/6 of the way through the whole book. It's not going to be like that. Trust me, it's really not going to be like that. But I can't tell exactly how long it's going to be. So what I'm doing is I'm making the schedule a bit at a time. So if you look at your table of contents, we're in the Tale of King Arthur, and then basically it's the entirety of the first section of the work, which is called the Tale of King Arthur, that I did for the schedule, and then we're going to move on to the Tale of the Noble King Arthur that was emperor himself through the dignity of his hands, and onwards after that, but one bit at a time. So keep your eye on the schedule. This goes, by the way, for the webinar sessions, which are accurate through like the end of August or something like that, and then I just have a bunch of placeholders essentially. So we'll keep updating that and the reading schedule as well. Let me bring out for a second here the page on our mythgard.org website. This is the Mythgard. So if you go to Academy, the Morte d'Arthur, here is the first one. You can find the information on our previous classes all there. So anyway, here's our Morte d'Arthur page, and you can find lots of awesome, useful information here, and including at the bottom our schedule, which, as you see, goes through week 6. So this is all of our stuff. Now, in talking about the schedule, of course, I should also mention the texts that we're going to be using. As I have been saying, we are using the Vinaver edition, the second edition of Eugène Vinaver's edition of Malory, based on the Winchester manuscript, and not on Caxton's division. The main thing that I dislike about Caxton, the Caxton text, is I really dislike his chapter divisions. He divides it into books and into chapters, and I find his chapter divisions uninspiring and actually distracting. I dislike those, and I like the sort of story by story groupings of things much better in following the Winchester manuscript rather than following Caxton. Anyway, this text also, I will admit, does some modernizing, right? Not much modernizing, but it does things like modern punctuation and capitalization and things like that. So there's a little bit of spelling, like it uses all modern English letters, for instance. But it's not a huge deal nor enormously intrusive. Now, for Arthurian scholars among you, you will be asking, why are we not using the new PJC Field edition of Malory, which is the new authoritative version, which has really supplanted the old Vinaver that I was raised on? There are two primary answers to this question. I have a practical and a wholly impractical reason for using the Vinaver instead of the Field. My practical reason is that I have found in every search I've done that the Vinaver is still just kind of easier to find. And especially it's confusing because this is the paperback edition of the Field. There's also a hardcover 2-volume edition of the Field, which is enormously expensive, and I don't want anybody to get confused that we're asking them to buy the ridiculously expensive hardcover version. So this is a great book. You absolutely can't go wrong. This is fantastic. But I find this easy. This one easier to find and a little cheaper to get as well. That's the practical reason that that I choose this. The impractical reason is that I'm a grumpy old man, and this is the book I was raised on, doggone it, and I like this book. So there, that's the one that we're reading. I've spoken. No offense to BJC Field, who is possibly the greatest Arthurian alive, and it's an awesome text. It's wonderful. Like I said, you can't do better. But that's it. I'm exactly, James. I'm settling into being a grumpy old man. You know, my wife keeps telling me I'm becoming a grumpy old man before my time. So exactly, James. I've decided to own it. That's it. Get off my green sward, says Tom Hillman. Exactly. So anyway, okay. So that's the story, and I'm not ashamed of it. However, now, some of you may be asking, though, well, surely this book is in the public domain, right? I mean, this book is more than 500 years old. So what if I don't want to purchase this text? Is there a freely available, there are versions of it on the internet, right? What should I do? Where should I find it? Well, here's the thing. Especially if you're an ebook reader, as of course many people are, there are no really good options for ebooks of this text, especially if you want to you can get some, a version through Project Gutenberg, but it's not. It's like a 19th century edition of the text, or an 18th century edition, or something. It's not the Middle English version, and so it's not really the right thing. However, so we have taken matters into our own hands, and here I have to praise the initiative of Jana Steen-Renneker, our long-term participant and listener, who has valiantly attended Mythgard Academy sessions in the middle of the night for many years. He's 6 hours ahead of me in the Netherlands, so this time spot is not the most convenient for him. However, what he has done, if you scroll up a little bit on this page, we have made our own ebook of the Caxton text, which is available online. And it's a really good Middle English edition. So if you click here, you can get either an e-publication or a mobile version of the book, and it looks like this. Now, here's the cool thing. Not only do we have the full Middle English text available here in the in ebook version, but we also have this specifically subdivided for our class assignments. So we've got our little introduction about our Mythgard Academy class. This gives you the actual division. So as you go through, because if you're reading the Caxton, the schedule that I've posted there on the website is from this edition. As I said, this is the one that we're using. So I have page and line number for this edition, so it's really easy to find for people who are using this. But if you're wanting to use the e-text and you're reading the Caxton chapters, you're like, where the heck do I stop? I have no idea. And how could you? So what you do here is you go through and you start, this is Caxton's preface, which is really fun. So by the way, Jana has made a separate table of contents here for the kind of chapter summaries that that Caxton gives, which is really fun. So this goes all the way through. Let me scroll forward a little bit here. Okay. Yeah. All right. We're in chapter 6 already. Okay. Hang on. Scrolling back. Okay. So this starts at the beginning of the first chapter of book 1. So this is our first reading for today. So you go through and you start at chapter 1 and you're reading through, and then you get to chapter 3 and it tells you this is where we stop chapter 1 for class number 1, right? So for tonight's class, this is where you are meant to have read, and then it tells you, we go through, and this is where you now start chapter 2, and it goes through chapter 2, and you see there's a little more reading for chapter 2 than there was for class 2 than there was for class 1. But then you're finally going to get to, there it is, the end of week 2, right? So all of this is set up for you so that you can keep up with the class like normal, and it's going to be really cool. So we're also going to be putting some extra stuff, and this is where it gets really exciting, right? Okay, our goal is to create something together, right? This is going to be a long project, this reading and this discussion. And this is not just about me doing stuff, and it's not even just about our class discussions. We want to create something here. We want to create, and this is kind of inspired by the fact that there isn't really a good Malory e-text out there, at least not one that's set up for ebook readers. So what we want to do is we want to take this basic text, this sort of basic ebook that Yana has been working on in conjunction with Curtis Wayant, our Mythgard webmaster, and we're gonna we would love to annotate it, right? We would love to have that be a community project as we go, right? We'd like to insert stuff as we go. So one thing we're going to do, for instance, is insert links to the recordings of the class sessions and stuff at the end of the readings, so that as people are looking through this, in the future, they can then watch our class discussion on that as we go through. But in addition, we would love more annotations. So if you see, going back to the web page for a second here, help us annotate the ebook, right? So we have a Google form here for you to submit stuff. If you have a textual note or gloss you would like to make, if you want to put in some details, like for instance, like here in this place, the Caxton text differs from the Winchester manuscript text in these interesting ways, right? We can do that. References to literary scholarship, something, if there's something that I said in class that you thought was interesting, or something somebody else said in class that you thought was really interesting, submit that, right? So that we can add, notes and framework. Again, all of this stuff is going to be free and open access, so we're not looking to put in copyrighted material here. But this is going to be really fun. Another thing, of course, that I would really like to do is to have links to audio recordings. And I think I've mentioned before that it's one of my fondest dreams, sort of on my bucket list, to have an unabridged Middle English pronunciation version of Sir Thomas Malory. There are unabridged recordings. The audible version is fine, but you'll notice, by the way, that the if you well, we'll get to it. Never mind. I'll come to that later on. Point is, they're recordings, but they're all in modern translation. If you got the Malory Aloud selections of Malory read aloud, published by the Chaucer Studio, one of my favorite companies in the world, then you were able to hear some awesome Middle English pronunciation. They do a great job, but they only do, like what, 2% or something of the whole book. We need to do more of that, right? So my dream is to have an unabridged Middle English pronunciation recording of Malory done in full cast mode, right? That would be so cool. And you guys can help make it happen, right? Practice your pronunciation. We're going to do this together, right? Practice your pronunciation. And as we do recordings, we can link those into the ebook, right? It's going to be great. So this is going to be exactly, Curtis will do Mythgard full cast LibriVox style. That's exactly it. That's just what we can do. And it's going to be really, really neat. So, anyhow, so there's Brianna, I agree. Some crowdfunding for illustrations and stuff would be very good as well. All kinds of things that we can do. So, anyway, I'll be fascinated to see where this grows. This concept grew in like a couple hours, right? From some initial conversations Curtis and I were having, and then Yana pitched in and was like, I want to do exactly what he didn't know we were already talking about. And so, we all kind of got together and this has started up, and it's growing. We will, by the way, be posting, that if you download the e-text, that's really good. Obviously, it's going to be updated. We only have the schedule for the first 6 weeks and stuff, so there will be versions of it coming out continuously, throughout the course of the class, and then of course we'll be annotating it and releasing that. So check back for new versions frequently, and we will let you know about that. So anyway. See how much fun this is going to be. We haven't even started yet. You see how much fun this is already going to be. So anyway, so many thanks. Many thanks, of course, as always, to Curtis, who has been a great help in getting all this stuff together and building the webpage and everything like that, as well as advising on the ebook. And of course, as I said, to Yana, who has been making this happen. I am super excited to see that project develop and to see the ways in which you guys are able to get involved and contribute some material for that. So, okay. Yeah, as Curtis points out, we will definitely share on social media and stuff when we update the ebook, so that you can know when you need to download it. So, okay. All right. Now let's talk about something else. Let's talk about language and pronunciation now. So I'm going to start by doing some other Middle English, right? I want to give a little bit of context here. And first of all, let me give a general disclaimer. I'm really rusty on my Malory pronunciation. I'll get better as we go through the class, but I'm out of practice reading Malory. My Chaucer's pretty good, but my Malory is really rusty. And in fact, my Malory is rusty in large part because my Chaucer is good. Let me show you what I mean. So let's look at Middle English. Let's do a tiny little lesson in Middle English pronunciation here and see how we do. So first, let's look at some Chaucer, so that we can get, because modern English. I'm just going to go out on a limb there and assume that. So let's go back a little bit to sort of classic Middle English, Chaucerian pronunciation, and then we'll kind of see how Malory is kind of in the middle between, as the vowels are beginning to shift in the great vowel shift between Chaucer and now. So here's the beginning of the Wife of Bath's prologue from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Experience, though no auctority were in this world, were reeked enough to me to speak of woe that is in marriage. For Lord Dinges, sith he 12 year was of age, he thanked be God that is etern on leave, husbands at church door he have had fever. For he so oft have he wedded be, and all were worthy men in her degree. By the way, she says, for I so oft have wedded be, which is a strange thing you might think to say. She's just said she had 5 husbands at church door, right? And then she says, for I so oft have wedded be, because that's how often I've been married, which sounds like an odd thing to add. But of course, the whole context of what she's going on to say is she's going to be contradicting the traditional teaching that says you can't have that many husbands, that like it kind of gets illegitimate at that point, and that your 5th husband isn't really your husband anymore, that 4 is the maximum. And she's engaging in that controversy. So that's what she's setting up there by saying that. Okay. So that's traditional Chaucerian Middle English pronunciation. So let me just kind of draw attention to a few things. Rule number 1 of Chaucerian pronunciation, consonants. Pronounce all the consonants, right? And that's relatively simple. It sometimes gets a little, you can kind of stumble over it a little bit. Things like Lordinges, right? And Ithonked be God. There's actually not too many weird consonantal words here. One that I would point to is this word, Enoch, the GH. You give it a good consonant, which is fun to do under any circumstances, which means, of course, that the word for the dude in armor riding around on horseback hitting other people with long sticks is in fact knichte. Knichte. You pronounce the K and the N, and you do the ch on the GH, so the thing is pronounced knichte. And that's kind of the joke, right? That's like the source of the Monty Python joke, right? That's when the French taunter calls them silly English kniggets, he's almost pronouncing it correctly in Middle English, which of course Terry Jones knows Middle English and has published on Chaucer, actually. And that's kind of part of the joke there. Anyhow, okay. So... Harnath, you like my title slide? Thank you. I designed it. I've been slaving over my I'm like, I'm going to be stuck with this slide design for months, so I better get this right. Anyway, okay. Does the double F do anything special? No, not really. I mean, generally, double letters just usually mean you kind of hold it a little bit longer, but no, there isn't a major. It's not like V's or F's or things like that. Yeah. So, okay. So other things that I would draw your attention to. Vowels, right? So the e's, short e's, are much like modern English short e's, but the long e, as in the end of autorité, right? That the e is pronounced a. That you get nice pure open vowels in Middle English: a, o, u. So the e's are pronounced a, autorité, and the a's, like 12 year was of age. Ah, right, the open ah. You never say ah in Middle English. You don't say a with a's, right? Those are e's that are pronounced like a's. So age, autorité. Okay, y's when used as a vowel, or i's when they're long. These are all short i's. In is a short, is short, right? Hir, H-I-R, that's a long I. Enoch, right? That, again, pronounced as its own syllable there as a vowel, just as e-wedded, right? So Y's and I's are pronounced like E's. They don't have any diphthong sound. It's just E, right? A, E, O, U for the vowels. Major sort of diphthongs that we do have, the AU in autorité, that's ow, just like AU's in Elvish, right? Easy to remember, autorité. And then the OU is pronounced oo, like moose or loose, right? Husbondes et kyrkjedor I have had fever. So autorité, husbondes, right? Double O's. So if you say, like, well, hang on, if OU is pronounced oo, then how is double O pronounced? Like here, N-O-O-N, right? How is that pronounced? Non. Single O and double O pronounced the same, right? The only difference is that you hold it out a little bit. It sort of indicates a longer vowel. Experience the non autorité, right? So you hold out the A in the EE and you hold out the O in the OO, but OO does not make a different sound. That's not noon, that's known, right? So it's kind of simple in some ways. Okay, maybe not very, but there it is. So experience, though none authority were in this world, were right enough for me to speak of woe that is in marriage. She doesn't need any authority. She doesn't need any church fathers to tell her that you'll have woe if you get married, right? She is the expert based on experience, because she's had 5 husbands and she can tell you everything about the suffering that is in marriage. This is the Wife of Bath's opening, right? Which makes it sound like she's going to turn things around and complain, right? And say, like, men are always complaining that wives make their lives miserable, right? But I'm going to now tell the woman's side. That's kind of how it sounds like it starts there at the beginning, when in fact she's doing stuff that is so much more complicated than that. But that's okay. We're not here to talk about the Wife of Bath. We're just here to pronounce her language. Now, Sharon, great question. Fiva, that's just the U here is the consonant V here. Liva, fiva. Those are just that's just a typographical convention from the manuscripts that's been preserved in this particular edition. Yeah. So that's not actually a vowel at all. That's a consonant. Okay. The Latin UV thing is fairly common in medieval manuscripts. Okay, so this is how Chaucerian Middle English sounds. When we get to Malory, things have started to change significantly. On the one hand, you still pretty much do all of the consonants thing, right? So knights are still knichts in Malory, which is fun because you get to do the hard K in knight all the way through the text, right? Thousands of, I don't know how many instances there are. Lots, though. And you'll get to use the hard K lots of times. It's funny, I was just listening to the Malory aloud again on the way home when I was driving my son to his thing off this evening. And we were driving home and he busted out laughing when we got to the passage about how Sir Palomides kneeled upon his knee. Or kneeled upon his knee. See, that's a kind of mistake I'm going to make all the time. Anyway, pronouncing the K in knee was especially comical. So anyway, so do all the consonants, and the GHs are still right. So you've got so again, knicht will still be how you pronounce that word. However, you'll notice, okay, one thing to keep in mind. The terminal E's have pretty much gone away. Oops, I think I forgot to mention the terminal E's, though I was pronouncing them. So like age, live, five, right? When you have the terminal E, which is silent in modern English, it gets pronounced not as an equal syllable like, live and five are not exactly two-syllable words, right? They're kind of two-syllable words, but they're not two equal syllables, right? The stress is always on that first syllable. You just kind of get a little beat on the terminal E, but it does get pronounced, and it is important for the scansion of the poetry. That was really a turning point, actually, in Chaucer's studies. It was sort of an interesting thing after the vowel shift. By the end of the 16th century, so by the time we get to Shakespeare, they don't do the terminal E's and stuff anymore, and a bunch of the vowels have shifted, not all, but a bunch, and so they were still reading Chaucer, and they loved Chaucer, and they so then in the 18th century, right, they're reading Shakespeare, and they're just all about Shakespeare, right? But like Shakespeare and his contemporaries are all reading Chaucer and loving it, right? And they're all like, Chaucer is the greatest, poet ever. And so these 18th century guys are like, well, in the Elizabethan times, they said that Chaucer was the best poet ever, but they're reading him and they're like, this guy can't write a line, right? This is terrible. And it was because they didn't know about the terminal E, essentially, especially that, but other things too. So when the guy came along who finally figured that out, sort of people began to finally give Chaucer some respect. But, okay. So, so anyway, terminal E's. When we get to Malory, the terminal E's are done, right? So this is just king, no terminal E. King of all England. So it's not king. So we're fine with that. The A's are still, the long A's are still like the A's in Chaucer's English. So you get words like castle, right? And very prominently in the text, laddie, right? A fire laddie. And a passing wise, right? But as you can hear, the I's are shifting, right? The I's don't sound like E anymore. Now they begin to sound like the modern I sound, right? To bring his wife with him, charging him to bring his wife with him, for she was called a fire laddie and a passing wise, and her name was called Igraine. Again, I'm going to make so many mistakes because I'm going to slip into Chaucerian. Notice how I did nama. I did the terminal E, right? I can't help myself. It's going to take a while. It's going to be an adjustment. Okay. The other thing that we get, the thing that's hardest for me to do, the E's have shifted, right? So this is when he was king. And you're going to hear me say accidentally when he was king, because that's how it would be in Chaucerian English. But the E's are modern E's. So the vowels are A, E, I, O, U. Okay? A, E, I, O, U. So it's weird. I have a hard time with it. So we get laddie, he, like suppose, wife, right? Wise, and duke. Juan the Duke and his wife were common unto the king. Anyway, yeah. So it's tricky, but I think it's less tricky if you don't know Chaucerian pronunciation. So I'm trying to explain kind of where this fits. We do start to get modern diphthongs as well. So the OU, which made the oo sound, the oo sound has shifted. So double O's now mean oo. So we have, where is it? We have a good woman. Yes, but she, not Shay, I almost said it. But she, darn it, I did say it. But she was a passing good woman, and would not assent unto the king. Yeah, there we go. So good. She's a good woman. Not a goad woman anymore. She's a good woman. And OU is changing to the hour. So we get aura, like the pronoun OURE, aura. Not ura, as it would be in Middle English. Okay. I won't belabor this too much more, just to kind of give you a little bit of a little bit of context in all of this. So anyway, yeah, Craig, if you're learning Old English, it's going to throw you off even more. Yeah, it's not like Old English either. James Stevens asks, why is everything passing good? It's a really interesting word to use. I mean, you can see it's used in the word of like the modern surpassingly, right? Which we don't almost never say anymore. But passing is a favorite adverb of Malory's. He's going to use that a lot. A passing wise. She's really wise. I mean, so basically it means that her wisdom surpasses the wisdom of other women. Right. So he's not just saying that she's, and maybe of other men as well, but the interesting thing about it is that it's an adverb which has a frame of reference, right? It intrinsically suggests that the quality, right, the adjective that's being modified by the adverb passing, is being judged in comparison to other things, and it surpasses them. There's like an intrinsic competition involved in this, right? So the wisdom of the other fire ladies has been sort of measured, right, and hers surpasses that. That's why I think, again, presumably of the other women. So it's, yes, Alex, exactly. It's not passing in the sense of like you get a passing grade, right? Not at all. Not at all. This is an exemplary. Well, but again, exemplary doesn't say the right thing, right? It's the best of all of them. And you'll notice this is a way that Malory thinks a lot, right? Noticing patterns like that is interesting because it does really suggest some of the root concepts behind how Malory thinks, right? This question of rankings, right? It's if you can be strong, right? You can be very strong, but are you passing strong? Because in order to be passing strong, your strength has to surpass that of other people. And the only way you can do that is to, test your strength against other people. So we will see the strength of knights and their endurance and their skill with the sword versus their skill in the joust. We're going to see the fairness of ladies. And of course, in paragraph 1, we get the wisdom of ladies compared to others and judged by comparison. Nancy asks, do they have a leaderboard like in The Princess Bride? Absolutely. The Malory is like the one who invented the scoreboard, the leaderboard that The Princess Bride is sort of making fun of. So Rachel, yes, it's a superlative. It's a superlative, not necessarily, but kind of vaguely. Right? It doesn't necessarily mean she is the wisest of all the ladies in the entire land. Like, there's been a scrupulous measurement and hers is higher than everybody else. We do see him giving superlatives, right? And he usually lands a lot more on superlative. He'll give that a whole phrase, right? The greatest in the land, that kind of thing. But passing is a little bit hand waving, right? It just means really a whole lot, but it is in comparison. Like, she's way up there, right? It's not exactly the rank, but it's big. And David, yes, this use of passing is still common in Shakespeare's time. It starts to drop off a little bit, but no, Shakespeare does that still quite a bit. Not as often as Malory does, but yeah, that's still in Shakespeare diction. Okay. All right. So with that introduction, let's actually talk about this passage of text that I've been so far only using for pronunciation illustration. Yeah. Yeah, Matthew, I think it does suggest that if you gathered all the wise women, she would surpass them. Again, it's not necessarily an absolute superlative, but certainly, if you got a bunch of them, her wisdom would surpass like at least most of them, right? She would be in the upper echelon of wise ladies, no question. Yeah. Well, I would say somewhere between I'd say excellent, right? Her wisdom is excellent. That doesn't mean number one necessarily. It might be number one, but he's not claim. This isn't an overt claim for number one, but it's way up there, right? Way up there. Okay. Top quartile. Yeah, that's it. Top quartile. Okay. All right. It befell in the days of Uther Pendragon, when he was king of all England and so regned, that there was a mighty duke in Cornwall that held war against him long time, and the duke was called the Duke of Tintagel. And so by means King Uther sent for this duke, charging him to bring his wife with him, for she was called a fire laddie and a passing wise, and her name was called Igraine. So when the duke and his wife were coming unto the king, by the means of great lordes, they were accorded both. The king liked and loved this laddie well, and he made them great cheer out of measure, and desired to have lion by her. But she was a passing good woman, and would not assent unto the king. And then she told the duke her husband, and said, I suppose that we were sent for that I should be dishonoured. Wherefore, husband, I counsel you that we depart from hence suddenly, that we may ride all nicht unto our own castle. Okay, all right. That was rough. But there we go. Nancy, this is quite a scandalous opening, right? So now notice the context. This is, as I say in my subtitle, this is peace talks gone disastrously wrong, right? So Uther Pendragon is the king of all England and so reigned, right? That's important. He's not just titularly the king, right? He is the king and he's actually reigning. You can't take that kind of thing for granted. And there's a mighty duke in Cornwall, and he's been at war with him for a long time. So Cornwall is a different realm, but notice that he's not called the king of Cornwall, right? He's called a duke in Cornwall, which means that presumably the Duke of Cornwall theoretically owes allegiance to Uther Pendragon, right? And so the Duke of Cornwall is saying, dude, you might be king of all England, but you're not going to so regnate here in Cornwall. Forget about it, right? So he's like attempting to secede. He's not acknowledging the rulership of Uther Pendragon over him. But we know that there are many of the other local lords and barons around England who do acknowledge Uther Pendragon. That's why he so reigns there, right? And by the way, you will already notice that another favorite phrase of Malory's is by means, right? And this is the phrase that Malory seems to use when it's not really important to his story how this happened, right? Like by some means or other, whatever, it doesn't really matter. King Uther sent for this duke, right? So he's not going to get into the story of like the message that was sent, because you could do that, right? You could do the whole thing with like, and then he sent this messenger and he charged him and he told him to go to the Duke of Cornwall and say this unto him. And then he goes to the Duke of Cornwall and says that unto him. And the Duke of Cornwall is like, tell Uther that I said, heck no. And he sends him back, he could do the whole thing. So that's his indication. I'm skipping some. Right? You'll notice Malory is nothing if not efficient, right? He's not going to belabor this thing. This is a very short version of this book, right? It should be way longer if he were going into detail. So by means, King Uther sent for this duke, right? And so we're getting the précis, the abstract version, charging him to bring his wife with him, because this is the important bit, right? The peace talks between Uther Pendragon and the Duke of Cornwall are important because we need to know, A, that they're at war, that this is his enemy, right? But of course, notice it's not a foreign king. And of course, there are foreign kings all over the British Isles, right? You don't have to go to France to find a foreign king at this time. Anyhow, so So we know that he's an opponent, but really he matters because Igraine is his wife, right? And after all, what we are interested in here is Arthur, right, and the begetting of Arthur. Okay, good. And let's see. Yeah, Veronica, it is kind of reminiscent of King David and Bathsheba. The main difference, I would say, between the David and Bathsheba story is that it's not exactly like the taking of the wife of Urias in the King David story is much more of a betrayal of trust, right? That's Urias was the faithful and loyal soldier of King David, and so it's much more of a personal betrayal and a much more of an exploitation of power. What he does, this is scandalous, right? But it's not exactly on that same level. And Sharon, you're right. The poor Duke. It doesn't even matter who he is. We don't get his name, right? He's the Duke of Cornwall, the dude who was married to Igraine before, and we don't really cares. We don't really care. Yes, David Atlee. I think by means you can gloss that as skip a bit, brother. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah. Good. Okay. All right. So let's keep going. Where was I? One general context here. And I meant to say this before we started talking about the first paragraph, but that's okay. It's not too late to say it. As we talk about this book, I want you to do, and I usually say this at the beginning of reading books, especially famous books like this, which sort of tell a story that you're generally familiar with, right? Try as hard as you can to forget everything you know about King Arthur, about knights, about chivalry, right? I'm going to try not to use the word chivalry very often, except in the way in which Malory uses it. Try to use the it's one of my general rules, right, of trying to read and understand books. Try to use the vocabulary of the text. Don't impose upon it. Whenever you can avoid it, don't impose upon it external questions. So if you start asking yourself the question, what does Malory say about chivalry? You're skipping steps, right? Does he say anything about chivalry? What does the word chivalry mean to him? What does the word chivalry mean to us? When we say that, what are we thinking? There are things that we associate with that. Are those things, is that what Malory associates with that thing, right? Does he even have an opinion on this thing? Is it even a construction that's from Malory? We can't make those kinds of assumptions, right? We need to build the sense of what the values are in the story, what's important, take our cues from the text itself, right? So one of the things that I want to be doing here, especially as we're going through the beginning, I want to be understanding this world that we're in, right? What are the values? What matters here? One thing that seems to matter is the authority of the king, right? The very first thing that Uther does, apart from reigning, right, which is important also, is that he charges the Duke to bring his wife with him, right? So he's issuing a command even to a guy who's his inferior, but his enemy, right, who has clearly not acknowledged his kingship. But he charges him. He gives him a command to bring his wife, and the Duke does, right? Even though the Duke is his enemy, so that's interesting. What else do we learn? What other things do we learn? And especially, I want to be careful in making assumptions about sort of sexual mores and things. Let's take that as it comes, right? Let's figure that out again from inside the world of the text. What do we learn about that, right? What do we learn about that? Well, let's just looking at this text, right? So the king liked and loved this laddie well. Okay, so he liked her and he loved her. I'm not sure what the distinction is there, right? I'm not really sure. It'll be interesting to watch those two words, right? Let's see if we can. I wonder if we don't really have enough data, I think, to parse that phrase. What is the difference between liking and loving? I kind of think, Karita, that there is a difference, right? I don't think it's merely repetition or emphasis. It could be, but I don't think so. It doesn't sound like it to me. But I'm not 100% sure. Patricia, I think that loved does have to do, I think, like, if I had to guess, I would say that liked means admired and loved means desired. But that's just kind of a guess. And as I say, we don't have that much data here. Interesting. Matt is wondering if it could be attached to her description above that she's called a fire laddie and a passing wise. So both her beauty and her wisdom. Is it possible that this corresponds to those? If so, Matt, I would suggest it was reversed, that the liking would have to do with her wisdom and the loathing would have to do with her fairness, right? With her beauty. Kate suggests likes her virtue and wisdom, loves her bod. That's kind of that seems to be the general trend. I can get behind that. But again, let's watch and see how those verbs are used. Love is used quite a bit. Liked is used much less. So that would be interesting to see. And he made them great cheer out of measure and desired to have lion by her. To make them great cheer, that just means he's just being a good host, right? He's treating them really well. He's making them happy. And he desired to have lion by her. And that's fairly scandalous. Notice, by the way, we don't have any account of his actively propositioning her. Right? We're told that he desires to have lion by her, but it seems clear. Has he suggested taking any action on that point? Or has she just read the signals? Right? Because she is a passing good woman and will not assent unto the king. She is virtuous, right? She's a good woman. By the way, notice that, right? I said virtuous, but that's not what the text says, right? Which is actually kind of important because the word virtue means something really quite different. She's a good woman. What does it mean to be a good woman? To be a passing good woman, right? Her goodness surpasses that of at least most other women, right? And she is manifesting her goodness in that she would not assent unto the king. So notice the parallel here. We have both the Duke of Cornwall and his wife who are both in their own way resisting the authority of the king. He may be the king of all England, but that doesn't mean he gets to rule over Cornwall necessarily, right? The Duke of Cornwall has a different opinion about that point. And that's not a radical, crazy thing. We will see lots of kings of little kingdoms which are not under, the kingship of England, even though they're just like a couple counties over. So the idea that he would want to set up Cornwall on his own, not totally crazy. She also, his wife Igraine, resists the authority of the king when he attempts to exert his authority unlawfully over her, right? To induce her to break her marriage vows and the law. And assent unto his desire to have lion by her. Merlin asks a great question. He made them great cheer out of measure. Out of measure, sorry, not Chaucerian. Out of measure. Does out of measure suggest that he overdid it? That's a really interesting question. I don't know if it necessarily implies excess, in the sense of that it was wrong for him to do it. Out of measure does mean more than would have been expected, right? He was hosting peace talks. He is the host. of the Duke and his wife. As host, he would be expected to show them good cheer, right? He would throw feasts for them. He would maybe arrange entertainments for them. He would show them a good time, right? That's his job as host. The great cheer that he does show them is great cheer out of measure. I don't think that that's a condemnatory phrase, right? That like everyone is like, oh man, he's going hog wild on the cheer here, right? It's fine, I think, but it's disproportionate, right? He's gone above and beyond the Call of Duty on the hosting thing, right? Which suggests that he might possibly have some other reasons for it. Yeah, good. David was asking about a very similar thing there. Yeah, Lee, exactly. Now, you're right to say that, Lee, coming back to the authority of the king here, Igraine realizes that she's passing wise, right? She realizes that the two of them, and she personally, are in a really touchy position, right? She's not going to assent unto the king. She's not going to go unto the king privily. Right? She is not going to permit the king to fulfill his desires, right? But if he were to command her, things could get ugly, right? So yeah, he's an authority over them, right? And this is why, in her wisdom, she says, "My counsel is that we get out of here right away." Right? We don't want to be in the position of having to, to be accused of being, rude, at least to the king, defiant even of the king in his own hall, especially when he's showing them great cheer out of measure. Darn it. And so her suggestion has wisdom in it, definitely. And notice she's also reading his plans, right? I suppose that we were sent for that I should be dishonored. She's beginning to suspect that this might have been his plan all along, right? Did he have ulterior motives when summoning them in the first place? And by the way, did he have ulterior motives? We don't really know, right? Does he already know how fire the laddie of the Duke of Cornwall is? Notice she was called a fire laddie and a passing wise. I don't think he's met her before, but he's heard of her reputation, right? She is called a fair lady. So he kind of wants to see for himself, right? And then the Duke brings his lady, and indeed she is fair. And he decides that that looks like a good thing. So I don't know that Igraine's accusation, therefore, is justified. But by the way, there's another way that we could read that sentence. So she says, I suppose that we were sent for that I should be dishonored. It doesn't necessarily mean that she's accusing him of malice aforethought, right? You could read that as saying, the for that is the phrase that I'm focused on here. I suppose that we were sent for that I should be dishonored. She could be saying nothing other than the outcome of our being sent for is likely to be that I'm going to be dishonored, right? So you could gloss that line as her basically saying, okay, husband, this is not going to end well, right? The outcome of our coming here, it's likely to be one way or another. It's going to be bad, right? So let's beat. It is also possible that she is accusing him, as I said initially, of like that this was his strategy from the get-go, right? That the entire purpose why they were invited under false pretenses. So, I'm not quite sure if I would necessarily read her words quite that strongly, but I think it's definitely consistent. It seems consistent with the text. And yet, Nancy, it is a bit suspicious, right? I mean, if she did think that, who could blame her? It looks bad. It definitely looks bad. Mike, that's an excellent question. Mike asks, what about the dragon? He's called Uther Pendragon. What does that mean, right? Does that suggest something about him, right? Is he dragonish? in some way. That's a wonderful illustration of something that we have exactly one data point about that, right? We need to wait and learn more about dragons, and spoilers, we're not going to learn all that much about dragons in this book. It's funny when people talk about, knights and King Arthur, rescuing damsels from dragons is one of the first things everybody always talks about. And it almost never happens, actually, in this book. But anyhow, okay. Oh, good question, Alex. Alex says, does wherefore mean why? Like in Shakespeare, like, wherefore art thou Romeo? Like, how come you're Romeo? That line which so many high school students misunderstand. As if she's looking for him. Wherefore art thou, Romeo? It's dark. I can't see you. No, it doesn't mean that here. Wherefore husband, like, therefore, right? It's a transitional word there. It doesn't mean why. She's not asking a question, right? It is merely transitional. Great question. Veronica, yes, it does seem to be involved in his coat of arms, but again, let's just kind of hold off on this. One other thing that I will say is that although the use of the title, the Pendragon, it becomes very important in some later Arthurian retellings, especially, of course, in C.S. Lewis's and others of. You will come across the word Pendragon a disappointingly small number of times in Malory. We're not going to get all that much data about this. That's one of the reasons why I'm reluctant to talk about it too much, because it doesn't really seem to mean much to Malory. He doesn't emphasize it really much at all. Tom, that's a great observation. Tom Hillman says that by saying husband, right? Wherefore husband, I counsel you that way depart from him suddenly. By calling him husband, Tom says she acknowledges the relationship, right? She acknowledges that he is her husband, important under the circumstances, right? I've just been propositioned by another dude who actually outranks you, right? But notice I am making it clear that the connubial relationship between us is still in force, right? And primary. But she is of a wisdom and stature with him that she can counsel him successfully. She is counseling him like a peer, right? It's her idea what they should do. She doesn't say, wherefore husband, tell me what we should do to get out of this, right? No, she's got a plan, right? Which she advises him to execute, and he does. Yeah, Kate says she doesn't know his name either. I guess we can't rule that out, can we? Very good. Okay, all right. Hey, let's do slide 2. And in likewise, as she said, so they departed, that neither the king nor none of his conseil were ware of their departing. Also soon as King Uther knew of their departing so suddenly, he was wonderly wroth. Then he called to him his privy conseil, and told them of the sudden departing of the duke and his wife. Then they advised the king to send for the duke and his wife by a great charge. And if he will not come at your summons, then may ye do your best. Then have ye cause to make mighty ware upon him. So that was done, and the messengers had their answers, and that was this, shortly, that neither he nor his wife would not come at him. Then was the king wonderly wroth, and then the king sent him plain word again, and bade him be ready, and stuff him, and garnish him, for within 40 days he would fetch him out of the biggest castle that he hath. When the duke had this warning, anon he went and furnished and garnished two strong castles of his, of the which the one hight Tintagel, and the other castle hight Terrible. Okay, whew. All right, things get really touchy here. Excellent, Stephen. I was hoping you were going to ask that. Yes, the double negatives. They are additive, indeed. That is like, that's the same is true of Chaucer as well. So, yes. So when the message that the Duke of Cornwall returns to Uther is shortly that neither he nor his wife would not come at him, right? That's not a double negative in the modern sense. Negatives in Middle English add, right? If that just means it's twice as negative as a regular sentence, right? And there's little that I find more charming about Middle English than their use of extra negatives. You can find sentences in Chaucer that have 4 or 5 negatives, because that's just how negative the statement is. So that's really fun. So several of you were asking about the word garnish, right? Garnish is fun. It does not mean what it means in modern English, right? He's not garnishing his castles or himself in the sense of putting little sprigs of parsley next to it in order to make it look more attractive on a dinner plate. He is, no, it has nothing to do with that. He is, to furnish and garnish him. So notice the 2 phrases we get. Bade him be ready, and stuff him and garnish him. And he's supposed to furnish and garnish 2 strong castles, right? So that means to fill out with all necessary things, right? He's preparing for a siege. Stuff is not quite as generic a word as it is in modern English, but still it's pretty generic. Stuff means baggage and everything. For instance, one of my favorite usages of the word stuff comes in the King James Bible when King Saul is first being anointed king, the very first king of Israel, right, is being announced, and they draw lots to find out who should be the king, and it turns out to be King Saul, and he's hiding among the stuff. Right. In particular, the stuff, it's their baggage. So like they've got a big pile of luggage, right? And he's hiding among the stuff, right? So stuff doesn't just mean, stuff in the modern sense. It couldn't be anything. Stuff could mean anything, right? In modern English, it means like necessary things that you have packed for a journey or for something similar, right? So. And yes, exactly. So he needs to stuff him and garnish him, right? He needs to pack his castles up and fill them with food and all the necessary things so that he's prepared for a siege. And he's going to furnish and garnish his 2 castles, right? To furnish them would mean to fill them with things like weapons and things that are necessary for the defense, and garnishing would be to fill them with, the foodstuffs and everything that he needs. Notice food stuff, that word, contains like the food that you pack, right? Okay. Good. Joe asks, what does it mean that the king sent the Duke plain words? Playne. He's not beating around the bush, is what that means. So, because often, if you send a message to a political opponent, right, you might speak indirectly, you might try to maintain plausible deniability about this or that, right? You might make a cloaked threat or something, right? So that later on, if you do come to battle, you can't be accused of being the aggressor. So you you make it clear that you're threatening him, but you don't actually say it, right? If he's going to send him plain words in that way, he's going to say it right out, right? He's saying, I'm going to come and I'm going to pound you personally into a pulp and kill all your people, right? I'm coming after you. Let there be no 2 ways about that. So that's what it means that he sent him plain words. And by the way, you guys are asking awesome questions. Can I just say, I love questions about the fact that you're reading this carefully and asking about particular words and phrases. That's just what you need to do when reading Middle English, because that's how we build our vocabulary, right? So that we understand not only this world that he's describing, but the way he talks, right? And the way he thinks, the way this story works. Yeah, good. Okay. Let's see. What else did I want to talk about here? Lots of things. A personal thing. These first couple slides are of great personal significance to me. I will never forget the time in high school when I found in our town public library, I was in 9th grade, and I found in our town public library an unabridged edition of Malory. And it was in modern translation. I mean, it wasn't like a really good text, really, but it was my first encounter with it. And in encountering it, it was the first encounter I had ever had with a real piece of medieval literature. Now, I was in 9th grade, which means I already had considered myself a Tolkien expert for many years, right? So I knew Tolkien and Tolkien's world. I have talked before about how Tolkien is kind of responsible for my becoming a medievalist, because having been sort of steeped in Tolkien's world for a long time, when I encountered real medieval literature for the first time, it wasn't like encountering something new. It was new and it was fresh and remarkable, but it also was familiar, right? And felt familiar in some kind of deep way. And that I blame Tolkien on, not for prompting me to read medieval literature, but for enabling me to feel so much at home when I did read it, right? So these last few paragraphs that we've been reading were the first pieces of medieval literature, the first sentences of medieval literature I ever read. And I distinctly remember there were many phrases that just brought me a kind of delight that I had almost never experienced in reading before. And that phrase, wonderly wroth, was one of them. I can remember distinctly just kind of mouthing that phrase to myself. He was wonderly wroth. I kind of think I became a medievalist when I read the phrase, he was wonderly wroth, in this paragraph of this book, which fortunately the modern translation that I was reading retained. I don't think it was a terrible modern translation that I was reading, but it wasn't in Middle English, but whatever. But yeah, that always got me. Yeah. Anyway, okay. Let's see. Other questions that you guys had. Kate is struck by within 40 days. It is an odd time period, but of course it's biblical, which I assume is where they're drawing it, right? Or rather, that's why 40 days seems logical to them, because 40 days, those of you who know the Bible, what does 40 days mean? Like, if you had to translate the phrase for 40 days, how would you translate it? Roughly, right? The general sense of it. It's if things happen for 40 days and 40 nights, it means for a really long time, right? That's the kind of generic, it's a long time. Now, I'm not taking a stand on whether or not a literal 40 days and 40 nights is indicated or anything like that. They may be using it with exact precision, but that's the number they always pull out when they're talking about something that went on for a really long time. At the flood, it was raining like forever. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. The children of Israel traveled in the wilderness for like ever. I mean, they were out there for 40 years. Jesus was fasting in the desert for a long, he was fasting. This was a serious fast, right? 40 days and 40 nights. Again, I'm not saying that I'm taking no stand about whether we interpret those 40s in the Bible literally or not. But what I am saying is it's to me, this seems to be premised upon. I think that that's not a coincidence. And King Uther seems to be saying, what's significant about his giving him 40 days? I know, forget the exact number 40, right? Think of why does he say that, right? Well, let me back up from that a little bit. Paraphrase this. He's saying, I'm gonna come attack you, right? But he doesn't just say plainly, I'm gonna come and make war on you. He says, within 40 days. Now, you're right. Veronica says he does say within 40 days. So it could technically be tomorrow, right? Yeah, that would be pushing it a little bit. But it is an outer bound of how long it's going to be before he comes, right? But anyway, within 40 days, he would fetch him out of the biggest castle that he hath, right? So you should be ready and stuff you and garnish you. Yeah, Matt, exactly. The emphasis that he has here is take your time. Get ready, right? I'm coming, but I'm not coming right away, right? It's not going to be forever, though. Within 40 days, I'm coming. But 40 days, right? You got some time. Get ready. Be ready. Stuff you and garnish you, because within 40 days, I'm going to fetch you out of the biggest castle that you have, right? Go to your most defensible spot. Prepare your most defensible spot as well as you possibly can, right? As thoroughly as you be, as ready as you possibly can be for a siege and for warfare within your most defensible look. And I'm gonna get you out of it, right? I'm gonna come for you no matter what. So on the one hand, he's warning him, right? This is not there's zero attempt at a surprise assault here by Uther. Instead, this is a power move, right? He is boasting. I am coming for you, and there is nothing you can do to stop me. Try to stop me, right? Go to your biggest castle, stuff it, garnish it, do whatever you want to do. I'll give you time, right? But within 40 days, it could be 40 days, right? Within a long period of time. But I'm coming for you. And when I come for you, I am taking you down, no matter how big your castle is, and no matter how much you stuff and garnish yourself. So this is a brag. And it is, David, you're right, an attack on honorable terms. He's not going to take him by surprise. This is, I think, one important piece of information that we get here. This is a pattern that we're going to see. Right? If you are making honorable war, you send defiance first, right? It is shameful to just attack out of nowhere, right? A surprise attack, that would be disgraceful, right? I'm going to tell you I'm coming, and then I'm going to come, right? So there's this kind of mutual agreement here, and we're going to meet on the most level possible terms, right? You get all ready, I'll get all ready, and then we'll see who wins, right? So yeah, that seems to be the, as far as why exactly he does it, I mean, we can imagine. And now, Harnuth, you're absolutely right, that this was a time when it would often take weeks or months to recruit, organize, equip, and train an army. There's not a professional standing army. So you would have to, if you were at war, you would have to call in your vassals, and then they would call in their vassals. And so but yeah, you don't have an army just sitting around in barracks in your capital, right, ready to march out. So, he's bringing his army. Uther is bringing his army together, and the Duke is bringing his army together. Now, somebody, and I missed it from before, I forget who it was, but somebody was asking, hang on a second, why is he like redeclaring war here, or like declaring more war? Wasn't he at war already? Like, why is this a change? And I think that the reason for that, or rather what I take from that, let's look at the phrase here. What does his Privy Council say? his privy council advises him to send for the king by a great charge, right? So he's going to send his command, and notice this is their sort of politics, right? This is their political stratagem here. If he will not come at your summons, then may ye do your best. Then have ye cause to mock michty wear upon him. So let's think about that. You have cause now to make mighty war upon him. So is he making unmighty war upon him before? Yeah, no, Tardonio, yeah, I think there was like a cold war between them before. Because now think about this. Who's talking to the king here? Who's talking to Uther? His council, right? His privy council, which is composed of the other dukes and barons of the land. The other dukes and barons of the land, in general, are not going to be huge fans of the king deciding to call up all of his people to go pounce on a duke of the land, right? I mean, after all, if he's going to go and he's going to take down the duke and he's going to take the duke's wife and like annex his land, that's an uncomfortable precedent, right? And if we're dukes and barons, we're going to have second thoughts about that. The relationship between the king and the barons is tricky, right? Remember that he was the king and so regned that we got in the first sentence, right? He's reigning because his dukes are with him, right? This is important because, so he was at war before. He was in conflict with the duke, but he wasn't in the field. He didn't have an army in the field against the Duke of Cornwall before. They were at odds, right? He was defying him, but they hadn't gotten around to war yet. That's why when Uther calls the Duke to this meeting, right, at the beginning, the Duke comes because real war might perhaps still be averted, right? If they could kind of work things out, right? So that would be good. But now he has cause to make mighty war upon him. All the other dukes are going to agree. Okay, if you're going to act like that, right? If the king gives you a charge to come and you just defy the king, you just absolutely flatly, he's backing the duke into a corner. The duke has to either come or he has to be essentially himself declaring war on Uther. And this will give Uther the political justification that he needs to make mighty war, to get an army in the field and invade Cornwall, which he's not done before. Okay, good. Jonathan asks, would the original request be deemed a parley and therefore he needed time to declare that the parley was over? Well, yes. This is why, again, notice the sending that goes back and forth, right? First he sends the summons. And notice how we don't do the by means thing here, right? Remember, we got the summoning was happening. So by means, King Uther send for the Duke, right? Charging him to bring his wife, right? That's all that we need to know. Now we need to know a little bit more about the sending so we get more detail, right? He sends the great charge to the Duke, and the Duke gives the messengers their answers, right? So now we have them bringing their answers back to King Uther, and their message was shortly, no, they're not coming. Then was the king wonderly wroth, and he sends him another message. And at this message, he's saying, okay, that's it. He's officially declared war and told him to prepare himself. Yeah. Good. Lee says, I have the feeling the king did not tell his privy council why the Duke and his wife suddenly departed. Even though they probably know darn well why. Yeah, that's unstated here. And you'll notice, of course, the repetition of that wonderful phrase, wonderly wroth, here, right? He is first wonderly wroth when they depart suddenly. And the wrath, which is so wonderly, seems at first very likely has much to do with Igraine escaping him, right? He was really hoping that something was going to come of that, and now his desire has been frustrated. And of course, he's been insulted by the Duke as well when he was making them great cheer out of measure, right? So that was great. So it was a personal insult on a couple levels, and of course his desire's been frustrated. He's wonderly wroth again when he receives their defiance, right? When he receives the message that they won't come back. He sort of, I don't know, you sort of wonder if he's like privately wroth the first time and publicly wroth the second time. But I think it is interesting, that kind of repetition, right? Like now he's justified at being wondered. Now he can exert his great wrath, outwardly and with and to raise an army from his dukes and barons because he's been publicly and politically insulted. So it's very interesting that the way that honor is sort of, on the one hand, we see political scheming here, right? He is positioning the Duke into a corner, because notice the Duke also can't say why he left. This is why Igraine says they should leave in the first place, right? Because they're in a really bad place. If he were to say to the king, "No, I will not come to you because you made indecent advances to my wife, and I think you're going to dishonor her," well, that's just adding another insult, right? I mean, he can't, presumably can't prove that, so that would be twice as bad for him to actually say that. So he can't come, and he can't give the reason why he can't come, or else that would just make it even worse. So the best thing that he can do is just say shortly, neither he nor his wife is going to come at him. The Privy Council of King Uther has done a really good job of manipulating the political situation. And yet this is obviously not a situation where kind of any sort of scheming goes, right? Where the most clever person is the one who wins. If that little political machination starts to sound a little Game of Thrones, King Uther's response does not sound Game of Thrones, right? That is not how successful kings work, right? In fact, by the way, footnote, it's one of the interesting things that you can see happening in the first volume in Game of Thrones, that, Ned Stark is like somebody who operates under rules which are kind of similar, right, to how the Malory Knights operate, and that's why he ends up shorter by the end of the book, because he is not part of the cold political realities of the world in which he lives. That isn't this world, right? This world actually lives. Ned Stark would like this world. Good. Okay, well, let's see. Karita asks a very sensible question. Karita says, okay, if King Uther is already planning to invade and kill everybody, how could the Duke of Cornwall make it worse by personally insulting him as well? I think the answer to that question, Karita, would be the Duke of Cornwall is trapped, right? There's no getting out of this. He has offended Uther, and he's going to give Uther the political right to make war on him. So he's in trouble, right? There's no two ways about that. But his greatest hope, the Duke of Cornwall's greatest hope, would be that not all of Uther's barons are going to support this war, right? If there is only lukewarm support for Uther's vendetta against Cornwall, then maybe he won't be able to come with that strong of an army, or maybe his army will break up and go home sooner, right? So if he can hold out in his castles, and his castles are pretty big when it comes to it, right? I have never yet been to the ruins of Tintagel, but I really want to go. It's one of the top things on my list of things I haven't yet seen in the British Isles that I really want to see. But I've seen pictures, and man, that thing is defensible. Like 3 people could defend Tintagel for a long time. So it would be really, really hard to break into that. Yeah, Jennifer, it is totally a real place. It is awesome. Anyhow, okay, yeah. So Tintagel, enormously defensive. The only approach to Tintagel is by this like bridge, like 1 person wide. Like it's almost perfectly inaccessible, totally surrounded by water. Really, really great. Anyhow, so again, his best hope, the Duke of Cornwall's best hope, stuff and garnish your castles, right? And hope that you can just outlast him, right? Because he's going to have supply issues. He's going to have unhappy barons. But the more fuel he adds to the fire, the more likely Uther's going to be able to rally stronger support and everything. So I got to think that that's his plan, right? This is already bad. Let's make this as little bad as possible so that hopefully it'll be, we'll make it through. Okay, cool. Yeah, let's keep going because we're running out of time. So we're skipping a little bit. So he's come and he's pitched his camp before the castle Terrabil. And this is important because you'll remember the Duke of Cornwall and he puts himself and his wife in 2 different places, right? And that's in itself a fascinating thing, right? Why does the Duke of Cornwall put his wife into Tintagel and himself into Terrabil, right? And I think there are lots of potential answers to that question. One would be just sort of safety, so we won't get us both at once, right? But he's also kind of, it seems, perhaps laying a trap for Uther, right? What is Uther going to do? If Uther is just after the wife, right? If he goes and lays siege to Tintagel, that's kind of damning, right? The Duke knows Igraine is what Uther wants, right? So he's almost like tempting him, like, hey, she's over there, right? In, his strongest castle, so he won't be able to get into her. But anyway, she's over there, right? Why don't you go lay siege to Tintagel, right? Because then, of course, if you do, then I will come and attack you from behind. So that would be bad. But also, it's it would also be that would be a bad look, right? For King Uther. And if he does the honorable thing and attacks the Duke at Terrabil, then his wife is safe, right? So kind of a win-win situation. Several of you are saying it's a terrible decision, isn't it? Yeah, it's a terrible decision. No, it's a good decision. I think it's great. I think it's awesome. And I'm not really sure about the significance of the name Terrabil. It kind of has the look of one of those words which does not actually mean, doesn't have anything to do with the word terrible. But notice how terra is in there, like the word for ground or earth. So I suspect that it has more to do with that. But I don't suspect that it has to do with terror, in fact. Yeah. But anyway, let's see. Oh, by the way, kudos to whoever gave themselves the name Dolorous Stroke in the attendee list. That was well done. That's very good. Yeah. So yeah, I don't think Terrabil has anything to do with terror, but I might be wrong about that. But it's a fun pun, you have to admit. So anyway, okay. So King Uther does in fact attack, lay siege to Terrabil and leave Tintagel alone, right? But he's got problems. Then for pure anger and for great love of fiery grine, the King Uther fell sick. So come to the King Uther, Sir Ulfius, a noble knight, and asked the king why he was sick. I shall tell thee, said the king. I am sick for anger and for love of fiery grine, that I may not be whole. Whole. Well, my lord, said Sir Ulfius, I shall seek Merlin, and he shall do you remedy, that your hurt, hurt, I think it's okay, no, yeah, hurt, short E, that your hurt shall be pleased. Okay, he's going to seek Merlin. So, all right, Nancy asks, is it normal in the literature of this time to get sick for that reason? And how? Yes, it definitely is. So notice there's two causes, right? So our diagnosis is a twofold diagnosis. He's sick for pure anger and also for great love, right? Between these two things, he's sick. And Lynn, I absolutely agree. We see the word love used twice here and clearly in the sense of sexual desire, right? So I think that liked and loved her well. I think it's fairly clear what the loved was getting at, right? So what do we see from this, right? What conclusions can we draw from this? Notice there's no shame here, right? Any sense that this might be an unmanly condition, right? That, the great and martial King Uther would blush to admit that he was mooning over a girl, right? And that he was, there's not a blush here, right? Now, he does put his anger in the first place. It's not just for his love of fiery grine, but it's right up there, right? His anger is pure and his love is great, and that's it, right? And he doesn't pause, doesn't hesitate, doesn't dissemble, doesn't beat around the bush. I shall tell thee, I am sick for anger and for love of fiery grine, that I may not be whole. That's it. I can't be whole. I'm sorry, I can't. Now, it just doesn't say, by the way, we don't know what his prognosis is. Is Uther likely to die of this distemper? We don't really know. This isn't really pushed to the edge. Is it possible that being sick for love can be a fatal condition? Answer, yes, definitely. That can be fatal. There have been known fatalities on record about that. But we don't know if Uther's case is fatal or not. And Ulfius doesn't seem particularly, worried. I mean, he's not, he doesn't demonstrate any extreme grief or upset, right? But he takes it in stride as much as the king does telling him, well, my lord, I shall seek Merlin. And the fact that seek and sick are homophones in Middle English is just kind of fun, and I don't know what to do with that. I don't know if there's an actual wordplay that Malory is intending there. I mean, it's a rhyme that Chaucer made on a couple of occasions, a very, very famous one right at the end of the famous opening passage of the Canterbury Tales. The holy blissful martyr for to seka, that hem hath holpen, Juan that they were seka. It's the same word, seek and sick. But he's going to get a remedy for this. So both of them are totally cool with this, right? This is fine. He's fallen sick, and this is a totally normal way to be. Now, David, you are right. The noble knight doesn't rebuke his king's immoral lust. Yes, that's an excellent point, right? Sir Ulfius, when the king says, I am sick because for the love of fiery grine, Sir Ulfius does not say, dude, she's married. Come on. What are you thinking? Right? No, that's not in it. Right? he's like, well, my lord, right? And by the way, when he says, well, my lord, I don't think that we need take that in the modern sense, right? With, well, my lord, right? We use the word well as a kind of a transitional word, which doesn't really mean anything. Well, okay, right? I don't think he's using the word well like that. I think he means the word well. Like, well, my lord, like it is well. When Sir Ophius says, well, my lord, I believe what he means is, it is well that you told me, right? I'm glad that you said this. This is fantastic because I've got a great idea, right? Thanks for being honest with me about that. And now let's troubleshoot this problem. That seems to be what he's suggesting there. Notice the play between sickness and wellness also, which seems to be going on there, right? That he greets the king's statement of his sickness by saying, well, my lord, which is exactly what his lord is not, right? And I can't help but think that that's a little bit of a joke as well. Anyway. Okay, so... Yeah, so Stephen, that's really good. Stephen says, okay, so Igraine feels that she would be dishonored, right? That the king's love of her was dishonoring her, right? But would the act not dishonor the king, or is he just not concerned with being dishonored? This is a wonderful question, right? We have what would seem to be a contradiction. Igraine very clearly said that she felt that she would be dishonored, and it was just her, right? That I should be dishonored. We were sent for that I should be dishonored, not that we should be dishonored. He's not dishonoring the both of them. He's dishonoring her, right? So she says that it would be dishonor for her to assent unto the king. And she's a good woman, remember, a passing good woman, so she won't assent unto him, right? So her resistance to the king, that's goodness, right? And it would be dishonor to give in. Okay. But Ophius doesn't go there, right? Is the king above that? Is it not dishonorable for him because he's king? Is it not dishonorable for him because he's male? Either one are a possibility, right? That it could be a gender-based double standard is perfectly plausible. That it would not be dishonorable for Uther, but it would be dishonorable for her. That's possible, but we can't really prove. Pam says it's good to be the king. Yeah, something like that. And Craig, I agree with you that I don't think Uther is being held up as a moral standard. But it is interesting, Craig, nevertheless, Ophius's reaction, right? Now, maybe this suggests that Sir Ophius is not the highest moral standard either, right? For all we know, Sir Ophius is the first knight that we've met by name, right? And the way that he comes up to the king and the conversation they have suggests that he is perhaps some kind of intimate of the king, right? That he's a friend or supporter in any case. Yeah. So are they buddies, right? Are they both on the same moral level? Does he not care? Again, we don't have enough data about this. Noble. Yes, that is very important, Megan. The noble Sir Ophius. He is called noble, right? Yes. Sir Ophius, a noble knecht. Noble means... Noble is a tricky word, right? That'll be another fun one to watch as we go through the text. Noble means first and foremost of good birth, right? He is an aristocrat. He is of noble parentage. However, that already long since also has moral implications. So the way that noble has come to mean virtuous and villainous has come to mean the opposite of virtuous, right? Has come to mean wicked or sinful. and whereas both of them were just descriptions of social classes, right? If you're noble, you're an aristocrat. If you're a villain, it means you're a peasant, right? But those things have long since in English taken on. I mean, it's well established in Chaucer. In fact, in The Wife of Bath's Tale, which follows the prologue that I was reading from before, that whole question of nobility and wherein does nobility lie and shouldn't nobles be noble, right, is one of the sorts. I mean, it's the whole premise of the story is it's a nobleman who does an ignoble thing. It's a nobleman who rapes a woman. And so he has committed this heinous act, and he's condemned to death for it. And by the way, it's an Arthurian story, the Wife of Bath's Tale. I think it's also why I was thinking of the Wife of Bath there. But anyway, nobility, yeah. So anyway, the whole question is like, so are you really noble or not? Like I said, those concepts are already all tangled up, but it's not exactly clear when he's called a noble knecht. Does Malory mean to be informing us of his exalted lineage, or is he praising his morals, or is he doing both? I'm going to say it's both until proven otherwise, but we should look at that. James says, is love considered honorable even if it's not socially acceptable? Let's see. This is, again, another one of these things that I want to build from within the text. There's lots that I could tell you about the courtly love tradition that this is following. But if I don't want to use the word chivalry, I definitely don't want to use the phrase courtly love, because that's a whole can of worms that we don't need to open. Let's just stick with the fact that we have observed an apparent contradiction. Right, we've got Igraine being worried about being dishonored, and we've got Ulfius and Uther speaking openly of his love for this other guy's wife, and neither of them is batting an eye about it. And the only question is, let's get a remedy for this. And our remedy is, let's find Merlin. He'll do your remedy. He'll please your heart, right? Which I think means that he would ease both his anger and his love, but I'm not really sure, because if he's going to appease his anger, it's less about his heart and more about his spleen, really, technically. But that's all right. Nevertheless, Merlin's going to solve your problem. So what's going to happen with Merlin? Let's go there. I love Merlin's first appearance. This is so Merlin. So Ulfius departed, and by adventure he met Merlin in a beggar's array. And there Merlin asked Ulfius whom he sought, and he said that he had little ado to tell him. Well, sighed Merlin, I knew whom thou seekest, for thou seekest Merlin. Therefore seek no further, for I am he. And if King Uther will well reward me, and be sworn unto me to fulfill my desire, that shall be his honour and profit more than mine, for I shall cause him to have all his desire. All this will he undertake, said Sir Ulfius. Undertake, said Ulfius, that there shall be nothing reasonable, but thou shalt have thy desire. Well, said Merlin, he shall have his intent and desire, and therefore, said Merlin, ride on your way, for I will not be long behind. Then Ulfius was glad, and rode on more than a pass, till that he came to King Uther Pendragon, and told him he had met with Merlin. Where is he? Said the king. Sire, said Ulfius, he will not dwell long. Therewithal Ulfius was where Merlin stood at the porch of the pavilion's door, and then Merlin was bound to come to the king. All right. Seek no further, for I am he is an appropriately epic intro line, Carita says. Yeah. Okay. Ulfius is a really kind of mysterious figure to me here. He knows about Merlin, and he says Merlin will fix you up, right? Merlin can solve this problem. Merlin is our troubleshooter. I'll go find him, right? So he goes out seeking Merlin. Now we have no idea. Does he know where Merlin is, right? Does Merlin have a popular street address, right? Does everybody know where to find Merlin? Is it just Ulfius who knows how to find Merlin? Does he have some kind of inside track? Are they friends, right? We don't know. We don't know any of these things, right? This will happen a lot. This is one of the things that I often have talked about in my medieval literature classes. One of the major differences between between a medieval romance, right, between a medieval story and a modern novel, we expect a certain amount of continuity. And we expect a certain low number of unanswered questions, right? If you're going to bring in a character, this shouldn't be a random character that wanders out of nowhere and goes away and we never see again, right? We need, modern readers are used to asking questions that they expect the answers to, right? Okay, why did this happen? Why did this person do this? What is the rationale? So, what's Ulfius's backstory, right? What's his relationship with? If we were writing a novel, we'd need to go there, right? A modern editor would be like, okay, who is this Ulfius guy, right? I'm like, he's like a cipher to me. We need to know more about that. We're not gonna get more answers to those kinds of questions. It's not only is it not how Malory thinks, that's just not the medieval literature way. Those are not the questions that medieval people are interested in. Remember that by means phrase that he tends to use, right? Medievals were big on focusing on the stuff that they thought was important and just not caring about the rest. We're big on knowing the whole picture, even if it doesn't matter, right? Of knowing people's motivations, even if they don't matter. So anyway, yeah, there will be lots and lots of questions that we do not know the answers to. And we're just going to have to live with that. And there will be lots of random people that will come wandering through the scene and you're like, where did they come from? And why are they doing what they're doing? And you're just never going to get an answer to that question. So you have to reconcile yourself to that fact. Yeah, good. Okay. Anyway, James, great question. Does little ado to tell him? What does little ado to tell him means? Okay. So, so Merlin asked Ulfius whom he sought, and he said, Ulfius said that he had little ado to tell him. I believe that means, I'm not going to tell you. I would translate that as, why should I tell you? He's in a beggar's array, right? Merlin is in rags, on foot and in rags. And so here's Sir Ulfius, right? The noble Knight. So he's noble, right? Whatever noble means, it certainly means he is of noble birth, right? So, unquestionably, he is of high parentage. Oh, and I'm sorry, that reminds me, and I missed this before. Somebody was asking me what the word height meant. Hy, it was in with the castles, right? Yes, hicht, one hicht, tintagel. It just means named. Hicht means named. What are they called? They're called tintagel. And they're called terrible. So yeah, hicht means named. That's important. Sorry, I just vaguely remembered that passing me by before. Okay, so yeah, so here he goes, riding past, and there's a beggar dude, right? A beggar on foot in rags who speaks up to this knight riding past him and is like, hey, who are you looking for, right? And Ulfius's response is a very sensible response, right? What business do I have telling you? Or what business do you have asking me, right? So he's telling him mind your own business, right? I'm a knight. Who are you? And Merlin's response is then, I know whom thou seekest, for you seek Merlin. Therefore seek no farther, for I am he. And if King Uther will well reward me and be sworn, he shall be... So he then reveals, A, who he is, and I know who you are, and I know what message you're carrying, and I know what King Uther wants already, right? So Merlin proves himself right away. So Yeah, Stephen says, okay, in fairy tales I'm used to, insulting or dismissing someone dressed as a beggar is always bad news. Merlin doesn't seem to have a problem with it. Yeah, yes, Stephen, you're right. The fact that Ulfius is riding past, this beggar dude, right, and disses him first. And the beggar dude turns out to be Merlin in disguise. That sounds like the beginning of a fairy tale, right? And Stephen, you're absolutely right about the direction it looks like that fairy tale is going. This is looking bad for Ulfius. He's about to have some curse placed upon him or something, right? You'd think, right? But no, it doesn't go that way. So here we have this free-floating fairy tale element, it would seem. This is not for the last time are we going to encounter this sort of thing. And it is no coincidence that it's Merlin who is connected with this, right? What is the connection between Merlin and the fairy tale tradition? It's not just the beggar in disguise, the disguise as a beggar thing, right? He then immediately says, I will do what Uther says if he will be sworn to fulfill my desire. Right? I'll give him what he desires if he will promise in advance to give me whatever I will ask of him. And again, Stephen, right? If you've read fairy tales, you're like, don't do it, Uther! No! Oh my goodness, that is always a bad idea! But that's exactly like what a fairy tale person who might dress as a beggar might say. Right? And Ulfius says, there shall be nothing reasonable, but thou shalt have thy desire. So notice he does try to put a proviso on it. He's like, okay, I'm sure Uther will give you anything that's reasonable. He doesn't promise anything unto the half of my kingdom, Jennifer. Exactly. It's exactly what Ulfius does not say on Uther's behalf. Stephen thinks that Ulfius hasn't read the right kind of books. That seems entirely possible, Stephen. Yeah. I don't know what kind of books he read. He presumably hasn't read the same books that Eustace has, but he certainly hasn't read the same books that the Pevensies have, I can tell you. As he doesn't seem to know what's going on here. Anyway, Merlin says, he shall have his intent and desire, and therefore ride on your way, for I will not be long behind. Now, notice what happens here. What's the business about not being long behind? What does that show? Right. Notice notice what happens there. Then Ulfius was glad and rode on more than a pass till that he came to King Uther Pendragon. More than a pass. That's a big Malory phrase as well, right? To ride a pass means to ride at a normal pace, right? So to ride at more than a pass means to push your horse faster than the normal riding pace, right? So he is riding as fast as he can ride back to Uther, right? In order to tell him that he met with Merlin. Merlin, in rags, on foot, right? And Merlin says to him, go back to Uther, I won't be long behind. So Ulfius takes off and rides his horse as fast as he can, leaving the dude on foot in the dust, right? And he gets to the king, and Uther says, where is he? Sir, said Ulfius, he will not dwell long. Oh, I think he's probably right behind me, right? Therewithal, Ulfius was where Merlin stood at the porch of the pavilion's door, and there he is, right? As soon as Ulfius delivers his message and the king says, where is he? There's Merlin, right at the door. How did he get there? How did he keep up? How did he get there as fast as Ulfius did? Ulfius is galloping across country. Merlin was on foot. Poof, there he is at the door, right? There is no attempt to explain this, and nobody's taken aback by this. So, what do we learn about Merlin in this passage, right? Well, we learn that Merlin is a problem solver, right, that you go to if he's like a consultant, right? He's not a consulting detective. He's a consulting magician, right? So if you've got an unusual problem that needs some kind of preternatural solution, Merlin is your guy, right? This is clearly how Ulfius seems to think of him. He is famous for his knowledge. Ulfius does not bat an eye when the beggar says that he's Merlin and reveals that he already knows everything that Ulfius is going to tell him. He's glad. He's like, oh, great, excellent, here we go, right? And he starts to haggle with him right away. He's like, okay, right, I'm sure if it's reasonable, you'll get whatever you want. And then we see that he has abilities beyond those of normal people, and we have no definition of that. We see no clear boundaries of that. Why does he appear as a beggar at all? Why is he going around in a beggar's array? Why is he dressing as a beggar? We don't ever know. We'll never be told why he was dressed as a beggar. If he seemed to be testing Ulfius seemed to fail the test, Stephen, as you pointed out, and yet no consequences came of that, right? For reasons best known to himself, Merlin is dressed as a beggar, and he's not about to tell us, and neither is Malory, right? How did Merlin get there? Can he teleport himself? Can he turn himself into a bird and fly? We don't know, right? But that's okay. But that's the point, is that we don't know. But everybody seems to be okay with that. So we have these kinds, these things that are, they come thick and fast, these fairy tale motifs, right, about Merlin. He's right out of the old stories. But yet he's part of this world and everyone's fine with that. Nobody seems to have any problem here. Jennifer says the answer to anything Merlin does is because Merlin. Yeah, I mean that's exactly what we're getting. Craig Brush says, "Dear modern authors, magic should be mysterious." Yeah, you're not gonna have a problem with Malory on that front, I can tell you. David says, does Malory assume his audience knows about Merlin from other sources? Yes. Malory assumes everybody already knows everything. I think that's fair. That is, he's not making anything up. He doesn't claim to make anything up. He doesn't assume that any of this or any of these characters are new to anybody. So he's not gonna give us a big backstory to Merlin. Is there a lot that he's assuming? Well, we have to be careful there, because it's not clear exactly which books he would be assuming everybody would know. But he doesn't need to introduce the character generally. Yeah, exactly, Tom. It's a whole different kind of creativity. Absolutely. This is not, he's not coming up with a new story, but he's also not just recycling stuff either. Jennifer, fan fiction. Exactly. Well, almost all of medieval literature is fan fiction, Jennifer. That's exactly how it works. Yeah, exactly. So David says, I assume we can't assume that his audience thinks of exactly the same Merlin that we think of. Well, I mean, no. I mean, certainly our Merlin has been infected by Disney cartoons and by all kinds of things, right? So there's lots of Merlins that we've gotten in modern film and book. So I mean, obviously that's not going to be exactly the same. But yeah, like I say, just ditch your assumptions about Merlin, about everything, right? And let's just see what we get here. Let's build it from scratch. Okay, let's see. Let's do one more on the subject of fairy, and then we'll stop. We're almost done. When King Uther saw him, Merlin that is, he said he was welcome. He sighed he was welcome.
Sir, said Merlin, I knew all your hurt every deal. So ye will be sworn unto me, as ye be a true king anointed. To fulfill my desire, ye shall have your desire. Then the king was sworn upon the 4 evangelists. Sire, said Merlin, this is my desire. The first night that ye shall lie by a grine, ye shall get a child on her. And when that is born, that it shall be delivered to me for to nourish thereas I will have it. For it shall be your worship, and the child is a vial, as mickle as the child is worth. I will well, said the king, as thou wilt have it. So you meet a beggar, and the beggar turns out to be a wizard in disguise, but you've dissed the beggar, right? And he turns out to be a wizard in disguise. And then he says, I will grant you all your desire if you promise me in advance to give me what I desire. And then the king says, oh yeah, no problem. I'll swear an oath on that. And then he says, great. What I want is your firstborn child, right? If you had just delivered to me your firstborn child, and I will take him away where you will never see him again. I mean, again, right? Like, what books have they read? Merlin is like a string of fairy tale cliches. And yet none of it is, it's like Merlin's the only one who has read these books, right? It's kind of amazing, actually. But notice a couple things here. First of all, Merlin seems to agree with the I won't ask for anything unreasonable clause that Orpheus had suggested. And secondly, he doesn't just ask. He doesn't ask for for his firstborn child in the way you might expect a fairy to ask for your firstborn child, right? He does ask him to give him his child to nourish where he will have it, right? So I will decide where to nourish it. I'm going to take it off on my own and make my own decisions about it. But he immediately qualifies it. It shall be your worship and the child's avail, as mickle as the child is worth. It's going to be good for you, right? It's going to be for your worship. So your praise, your reputation is gonna grow because of this, right? So it's gonna work out for you, and it will be for the help of the child. It'll be for the child is a vial. So it's gonna be, your reputation will be improved by this. It will help the child, as mickle as the child is worth, as great as as great as the child is worth, right? It's gonna be so. He's doing this for the child's benefit, right? And it's going to help you. So on the one hand, this sounds like a traditional, like Rumpelstiltskin kind of bargain, right? Except it's not at all. Has even Merlin read the right books, right? Does even Merlin realize the kind of book that he sounds like he's in? Is he still dressed as a beggar, by the way? I'm not really sure. Yeah. So we have all of these connections with the fairy tale tradition, and yet that doesn't seem to be how it's working. We get a sense of the fairy otherness about Merlin. There's something not normal about how he operates, right? We can see that for sure. And he talks kind of like a fairy. But he also doesn't talk quite like a fairy, right? He's instead also he's acting here half like mysterious fairy Rumpelstiltskin dude and half like wise counselor, right? I am privy to information that you are not. And I know that it will be best both for you and for the child if I take the child away and raise him in secret so that nobody knows who he is, right? Because as mickle as the child is worth, as much as the child is worth, and I think his implication here is the child is worth a lot, right? This is an important child. that you are going to beget. First of all, I'm going to start off just by telling you the future because Merlin, right? So when you sleep with a grain, you're going to get her with child. You're going to beget a child then, and it's in your best interest and the child's best interest if you give it to me and let me raise it, because it's going to be a very worthy child. And this will protect it. Stephen says, is Merlin saying he doesn't think Uther would be a good dad? Merlin is saying nothing of the reason at all, right? There could be lots of reasons why it would be to your worship and the child is a vile. I would assume it doesn't mean that he says you're going to wreck this kid if you raise him yourself because you're hopeless as a dad. That presumably would not be for his worship, right? For that to be known. I'm going to raise this kid because dang, you can't be trusted with children is probably not to his worship, right? So that probably wouldn't be it. But again, he doesn't give any reason, right? Yeah. Now, I agree with you, Pam, that it's not that surprising that Uther gives into this. But I would say to be careful here. On the one hand, yeah, you're right. Uther is thinking, he's doing most of his thinking with his nether regions here, right? He's interested in sleeping with a grain, and that's what he's in this for. So he doesn't seem to care too much. He's focused on his love for the fair grain and is not bothered, it seems, by what happens with the child. But this is not a typical fairy bargain on his side either. If Merlin were fully playing the fairy card, right? If he were just coming in as mysterious elfish dude saying, I shall mysteriously grant your request and make this magically possible, but you have to give me your child. And he was like, yes, I shall do that bargain and not care about the consequences. Then that would be just like what would happen in a fairy tale, right? And he would be, and usually when you do that, you know, when you are make a deal for selfish and short-sighted gain, without thinking through what the consequence is going to mean later on, normally that doesn't turn out well for you in a fairy tale, right? But again, that isn't what Merlin said, and that isn't how the king receives it. He has been given reassurance that it will be to his worship and the child's avail. So he's not saying, I'm going to choose the satisfaction of my sexual desire over the well-being of my child. He's been told that it is for the well-being of his child and for his personal reputation that he gives this. So it was a win-win for Uther, right? He gets the woman he desires, and it's going to be for his worship and the benefit of the child. Right? What's to say no to? I mean, this is perfect. This is perfect. And so thus it is in that way totally unlike the normal fairy tale bargain. And so therefore the whole fairy tale rationale here, the whole fairy tale morality doesn't really seem to apply. Yeah, and Matt, you're absolutely right. It certainly will be to his great worship, right? The only reason we're reading about what King Uther did, right, is because of the child that he's going to beget, right? No, Merlin is going to be proved true, as will generally happen. Oh, no, Lee, great question. She's a question about, I know your heart. I know your heart every deal. Every deal, that means, so deal, it means like every bit, every part, to every extent. Like you can also say, he's saying, I know this thing every deal. You can say, I like something every deal. It means every little bit, basically. I don't know exactly what a deal is, if a deal is like a piece of something or something like that, but that's the sense of it. I know your heart every deal. I know everything about your heart. I know every bit of it, every little bit. Yeah, good. Stephen says, were those sorts of fairy tales around at this time, or were they a later invention? There were fairy tales like this around at that time. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Stephen, that's right. Deal in the sense of there's a good deal more I could say, right? Yes, there's a good bit more. Yes. This sense of the word deal does survive in our use of the modern spelling DEAL in that way. Good. Okay. Okay, let's stop here. Let's stop here because it's late. And we should stop. Okay, so we will finish that. We will look at the story of the actual conception, right? And what I want you to be thinking about. Notice what Malory draws our attention to here, right? One of the things that's really important for us to come to do is to get in the habit not of looking at what we care about, right? Not at asking about the things that we're interested in, but paying attention. We can do that, of course, but to pay attention to what is the text interested in? What is Malory interested in, right? What does he focus on and draw attention to in the story of the conception of Arthur? And then we're going to move on to the famous drawing of the sword from the stone, which will not be what you quite think it is, probably. There are a bunch of things about the drawing of the sword from the stone which are perhaps surprising if you approach it from a modern perspective. But good. Okay, so we'll pick up. So we'll finish this section. You will notice that the reading for next week is longer. I'm asking you to read about a little more than twice as much as we read for this week, and I'll ask you to read a little more than twice as much again for the week after that. So we're going to pick up and do longer sections, and we're not going to go and read it practically paragraph by paragraph every week. I'm already expecting people to be talking about how at the pace we're going right now, having talked about a page and a half tonight, or almost 2 full pages, that we're on pace to take 7 years to get through Malory. We're gonna accelerate. We're gonna do this Mythgard Academy style, not exploring the Lord of the Rings style. But I'm deliberately going slowly on purpose for the sake of acclimating ourselves not only to Malory's language and figures of speech, but to his whole world. I want to see where we are at the beginning of the story. It's so important for us to begin to orient ourselves, and then we'll accelerate and move a little faster as we go. So, all right. Thank you guys very much for joining me. I will see you guys next week. The schedule is accurate, as I said, through August. So the first 6 weeks, anyway, are totally accurate on the webinar schedule. We'll move on and map out the next bit after that, probably in August. I am going to be away for the first full week of August, so whichever day that is, the 7th or something like that of August, I'll be away then. But I think that since it's Wednesday night, our schedule will be not disrupted by Baymouth when I go out to California, so that'll be good. Anyway, thanks everybody. See you guys next week. Bye now.
The Mythgard Academy has been offering in-depth discussions of awesome books and films since 2013, completely free to attend and free to download. If you've enjoyed our discussions and would like to help them continue, please consider donating